This is Pop Health Week on Healthcare Now Radio. I'm Greg Masters, your co-host and executive producer. Joining me in the virtual studio is co-founder and principal co-host Fred Goldstein. Fred also wears the hat of president at Accountable Health, LLC. Pop Health Week is your go-to platform for peer-to-peer conversation with industry leaders, innovators, and ecosystem stakeholders, including payers, providers, patients, vendors, and the regulatory communities. We come together to swap the best ideas and strategies in population health management. Connect with us via www.popupstudio.productions or drop me a direct message on Twitter via Greg Masters MPH, and that is Greg with 2 G's. You can reach Fred direct via Twitter at FS Goldstein or www.accountablehealthllc.com. On this episode of Pop Health Week, we are in the company of Keith Holland, the founder and CEO, and Dave Eckerson, president and board member of the Joint Task Force K9s, a faith-based nonprofit teaching the lives of active duty military, combat veterans, and law enforcement with disabilities through canine therapy and the placement of specially trained service dogs. After struggling with PTSD and traumatic brain injury, Keith received his service dog Quill in October of 2018, which changed his life. His new mission in life is to help keep veterans and law enforcement from going through what he endured. During Dave Eckerson's 35 years of service, he was deployed to Desert Shield and Desert Storm, Operation Restore Hope, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. The goal of Joint Task Force K9s is to prevent veteran and law enforcement suicide and help our nation's heroes with their integration back into the community by providing gains of mobility, independence, and peace of mind for post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injuries. And with no further delay, Fred, the mic is yours.
Thanks so much, Greg, and welcome to Pop Health Week, Keith.
Hey, Fred, thank you for having us. Greg, everyone involved, we're glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to get you on, and you too, Dave.
Good afternoon, Fred. It's so good to be on with you and Keith, and to be able to have the opportunity here to talk about Joint Task Force K9s, and it's truly a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, this is really a fantastic topic. It's an interesting one because obviously PTSD is such a big issue, and you folks as vets obviously know that and have been trying to help vets. So, Keith, why don't you give us a little sense of your background?
Yeah, so I spent 18 and a half years in the military, 3 of which was in the military police. And the rest of that remaining time was spent in Special Forces. I was an Army Green Beret. And then they medically retired me at 18 and a half years after having a suicide attempt on active duty.
Sorry to hear that. And your background, Dave?
Yes, I was in the Marine Corps for 23 and a half years active duty, and spent multiple deployments in 5 different continents. And as I traversed the planet, much like Keith, we're involved in several campaigns from Operation Desert Storm to Restore Hope, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom. And I've had TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, that have caused some of the issues that I've contended with over time, and that's enabled me to help and understand, much like Keith, in this endeavor we're taking on with the K9s and Joint Task Force K9s to help our fellow veterans and law enforcement officers that deal with the same thing on a daily basis. And that's why our motto is saving lives one dog at a time.
Fantastic, and thanks both for your service. Obviously, it's amazing what you and others have dedicated to our country to keep it the way it is and to allow us to continue to grow and to be successful. Really amazing. As I mentioned before, my father also was a veteran and served in Vietnam as a doctor, volunteer, headed over there, and I remember his joy in going to VFW meetings and things like that and talking about vets. It's just amazing the camaraderie you've obviously created, but this is just really a critical issue. I mean, PTSD is something that just has major impact on individual lives. So perhaps, Keith, if you could talk about that a little bit, and then we can get into Joint Task Force K9s and what you're doing with the dogs.
Nice. Yeah, so for us, PTSD is probably the number one killer for American troops right now, across the board, all branches. And more so with guys that are being out of service than guys that are being in, I would say. But PTSD is that enemy it's not seen, but the guys know it all too well. And we believe that there's a couple different levels of PTSD. It's explained as like a pendulum clock, right? You got the left side of the clock and the right side of the clock, and we feel that the PTSD is more on the left side of the clock. And then we also see something that's very similar to PTSD, and we call it operator syndrome, and that's going to be on the right side of the clock. So one thing about PTSD in general, it has the same symptoms and stuff, uh, either side of that clock, right? So you still have the anxiety, the depression, the irritability. So you have both of those symptoms spread across, and it also some of the same symptoms with TBI. So the majority of our people that we help out with our nonprofit and JTF K9s with the dogs is going to be those PTSD, TBI, and combat operator syndrome. And the reason why we look at that is because of the symptoms being so closely aligned with each other, even though they're technically three different categories, but it really is all stress induced, and it's all done through PTSD in our opinion. And we think that we can address that and help out all three of those situations in the long run.
And when you use the term TBI, you're referring to traumatic brain injury. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just
Yes,
so
sir.
our audience knows who may not have been familiar with that term. Anything you'd like to add to that, Dave?
Yes, and Keith hit the nail on the head. The parallels between each of those elements is uncanny, to the point of even some of the doctors and mental health specialists, they all are challenged at times to figure out what the root cause of those elements, those foundational elements for each of those three. They parallel each other. It's almost a mirror image of each other at times. So it's critically important to be able to identify that, so we can get those veterans the care that they need. And on point with the K9s, it's just absolutely amazing the positive effects they have on not just the individual veterans or law enforcement officers, but the families as well, and that core group of the families and friends that veteran has been affected by the operator syndrome, like Keith was talking about. But everybody's affected by it, and the sooner the veterans and law enforcement officers, and with the PTS, I mean, it's just horrific, the things you see. And sometimes I believe, just like many of us do, that number is higher than 22 a day. You see a lot of the numbers out there, 22 until zero, or you see that number a lot. But I think in more recent years, it's been substantially more than that. And Keith and I have been personally affected by that. And we also have lost so many people, like Keith had mentioned earlier, to the invisible wounds that people can't see. They can't see a prosthetic or a glass eyeball, or any external injury that they're like, oh, he's combat wounded. Well, there's the invisible wounds that people never see or even can understand, to say the least.
So there have been a lot of studies. I know there's been a real push to try to get these service dogs to vets. Obviously, they help them out quite a bit, and as you talked about, others in the police force, et cetera. So
Yes.
you formed, and Keith, I believe you formed this not-for-profit. Can you talk about that and the reason you did that?
Yeah, so I decided to start JTF K9s in 2022, and we stood it up in June. And the reason why I did so was that for the need of service dogs, and most importantly, for the need of service dogs that are actually trained to prevent PTSD attacks from happening. Because ultimately, if we can stop the PTSD attacks from happening, or the triggers, catch those triggers immediately once they are triggered, then we're able to flip that switch per se. So instead of these guys and gals getting that trigger and going straight to anxiety or depression or irritability or whatever that comes out as for them, we're able to get these dogs trained up to recognize that, right? And
Hmm.
those dogs come in and prevent that from happening. And what we're trying to do from a nonprofit side of view is help everybody that has these issues, but at the same time, we're trying to restructure the service dog world, because a service dog should be a preventative medical equipment as best as can be. And the problem nowadays is anybody can throw a service dog vest on a dog and go out in public and call it a service dog, and it's not doing anything for them. So we want to change how the government's looking at service dogs. We want to change how corporations and businesses look at service dogs. But the only way to do that is for us to change the rules and regulations on the service dog world. And our goal is to get that change to these dogs are providing a medical task, and that task is preventing those PTSD attacks from happening, or the majority of them from happening, and not being reactive as most PTSD service dogs are nowadays. So we're looking at changing that. We're actually training our dogs to recognize those cortisol level changes, and they come in, and once they see those cortisol level changes, they get the petting. Some people prefer it as like a pressure therapy. Some organizations refer to it as that. For us, the biggest thing is we want them to pet their dog when their dog comes in and pulls that attention. That way, we lower those cortisol levels. We get that stress out of there and prevent those attacks from happening.
For those just joining us, we're in the company of Keith Holland, founder and CEO, and Dave Eckerson, president and board member of the Joint Task Force K9s, a faith-based nonprofit, active duty military, combat veterans, and law enforcement with disabilities through canine therapy and the placement of specially trained service dogs. Stay tuned for the rest of the story.
Fascinating. And I understand also you use sort of unique dogs for this. Obviously, we can talk about the training in a second, but what kind of dogs are you using?
Yeah, so we like to use combat warrior dogs, just like our guys and gals that are coming in and out of the combat zone. One of the biggest problems with these guys and gals is once they leave that combat zone, there's a couple things that happens. Number one, they don't have their battle buddy there anymore, right? So they don't have their partner watching their back. And then the other thing is their mind doesn't leave that environment. And the reason why is because all those memories and smells and everything is not lined up in their brain right? So when it gets stored, it's just kind of stuck in there. And that's where the triggers and stuff come from. And then what happens is when the piece of that memory is kind of sticking out, flapping, hanging out in part of that brain, and they get that trigger, then that re-brings that experience back into life and makes it realistic to them. So we want these guys and gals that have these experiences to have that battle buddy with them, right? That's the number one thing. They have their battle buddy there. They're their protector. They're their comforter. It's just like being downrange with their battle buddy overseas. So that's the number one thing that these dogs provide is a mean of, hey, I got your back.
Mhm.
And then at the same time, we're easing the brain because now the brain doesn't have to be so hyper vigilant. We don't have to, we don't have to face the door when we go into the restaurant. We can wait in a crowd because our dog, our battle buddy, our partner is there comforting our mind because our mind is still in that combat environment. And then lastly, the third thing that these dogs do for us is they provide us a mission, right? We have to get up off the couch. We have to get out of bed to take care of these dogs. They're living creatures. You have to feed them. You have to walk them. And what that does for the guys and gals is give them something to do with their life. Because the reason why PTSD and some of these other things work in a negative effect is the guys and gals come home, they sit on the couch, and then they don't do anything because they have no purpose no more because they don't have a mission that they're training for. They're not going on a mission. They're not, that it's like, people say that your job defines your life, and it really doesn't. And we learn that through the healing process. But for these guys that are leading combat, it really does define their life because that's what they've trained for. That's what they've practiced for. That's what they've done their entire life. So to get them out of that situation is we need to get them off the couch and engaged in something different. And the best way we find that to help our combat veterans is get them a dog at the same caliber as they are, that warrior ethos, that battle buddy. And then that gives them a mission. It gives them a means of getting out of the house. It's an enabler. And at the same time, they're also providing that medical support, because we are able to lower their cortisols and keep them from having those attacks from happening.
Great. Anything you'd like to add to that, Dave?
Yes, speaking on the cortisol levels, and shortly after I received my service dog, a big thing for me was driving and road rage and dealing with general population on the highways and byways, especially when I get into traffic situations. But the first time I was going to an appointment and I had Kane with me, I had an interaction with one of those fine drivers, and Kane immediately came up to me. It was uncanny, and put his head on my shoulder, and immediately it just, like Keith was speaking about, it dropped everything. So I felt, okay, I got Kane now. He's got my 6, and he just hasn't these dogs. And the other thing to add on to what Keith was saying, because when you come home from combat, and some of the environments we've been in are just sometimes you don't even feel like you're on planet Earth. I mean, just the things you experience. But these battle buddies, all these dogs that we have, be it the Belgians, the Dutchies, the Germans, I can't tell you how many times, and I don't think Keith can have an exact count, they saved our lives from, be it vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, or IEDs and Jersey barriers, or, I call them, a lot of people call them suicidal bombers. I call them homicidal bombers, because their objective is to kill as many people as possible.
Right.
And because of these battle buddies, these exact breeds that JTF K9s works with are those battle buddies. So that's a sense of comfort seeing these same breeds and dogs that we were with overseas. Now you pair them up with the recipient, which isn't cookie cutter, like Keith was saying earlier. You just thought, oh, okay, here's your dog trained in obedience and agility, and slap a vest on it. That's totally the wrong way to approach this, especially for our brothers and sisters. And I've learned so much from Keith, and he was instrumental in a big part of training my dog, Kane. And I've just learned so much from him, and we feed off each other. And it's just critically important to always keep those things in mind, because the status quo in our general population is, oh, okay, that's a service dog, he's got a vest on. But they don't understand the time and resources and effort that go into that for each of those individuals that are recipients of these godsends of K9s, are service dogs. It's a beautiful thing.
You're fantastic. And can you, Dave, sort of touch on what a Belgian is, so the audience may not know the different breeds of dogs?
Oh yes, the
about
Belgian Malinois. They're a bit smaller than the German Shepherd, but their agility and the drive they have and their intelligence is so amazing that they can identify, they can learn. In fact, I have one that Keith and Lori will be handing him off here at the end of May, but he's been amazing in learning. And my service dog, Kane, he's a German Shepherd. He's been demoing and kind of mentoring. And Jaeger, he almost on the first try, a lot of times he'll emulate and execute the same thing that Kane did. And they're just so smart and responsive and agile. And that in itself gives you such a sense of confidence as being the recipient of one of these fine dogs. It's just absolutely amazing. Then the Belgian, or the Dutch Shepherds, excuse me, they, correct me if I'm wrong, Keith, at one point they almost became extinct in the mid 1900s, but they brought them back, and they're very similar in size to the other two. They're kind of in between, but they got a brindle coat. They're very smart as well, athletic, agile. But I'd say all three of them, and then the German Shepherd, they're very family oriented. They're very protective.
Mm-hmm.
They're very alert and in tune. Like with a lot of us, like Keith was saying earlier about hypervigilance, it's important to know that dog. And, some of us are, our hearing's not the best anymore because of the different experiences. So there are not just our eyes and ears, but then they can pick up on those invisible wounds when we're having from PTS. And like I said, TBIs kind of induce the same types of reactions. So they pick up on that. They're so intuitive. These three breeds are just, I think they were made by God to be here for us and do the things they've done since they've been around, saving our lives when we're overseas as our bomb dogs. And same for police with the K9 units when they're out there every day. But they're truly beautiful dogs. The Belgians, usually the males, on average range about 66 pounds. So they're a little bit smaller, but their agility, their intellect, and their athleticism is absolutely incredible.
Fantastic. Great points there. And I think, that I think of those dogs, and they're just so smart. It's
Yes.
people to watch them and how they can work, as you talk about, and learn. So Keith, as Dave mentioned, obviously, your program takes these dogs through a very intensive training. Can you talk some about that?
Yeah, so the training for these dogs is roughly a year long. We get these pups between 8 and 14 weeks, and we get 6 of them at a time. And the meat and potatoes of their training, of course, is obedience. One thing we don't do, which most trainers will do, is they use treats and toys and food to motivate the dogs. And we train them totally different. So we go outside the box a little bit. I don't use treats, toys, or balls to persuade, and I say persuade the dog to do what I want it to do as a reward, because I have the dog work for their handlers. So it takes longer to train them that way, because it's more about repetition and then the dog learning and associating that command with that repetition, instead of hey, here's a treat, you're going to eat it, you're going to be happy, and then the treat training makes it easier, but you got to look at where these dogs are going to be around, right? So these dogs are going to be around kids. They're going to be out in public. They're going to be out in restaurants, everything else. So why would I train a dog with a treat reward or a toy reward base if the people in the society these dogs are going to be around are going to have food and toys and balls at their level, at their height? So the first thing we do is we cut out all balls, toys, and treats. They work for us, the handler themselves, which makes the connection with their handler even stronger than trying to win their love. I kind of put it out to the ladies like this. If a guy was trying to buy your love or to show you words of affection and affirmation, which one would you like to be with the most? And most of the time, that answer is the affirmation and the words. So the dogs are the same way. If you try to win a dog's love by giving them treats and rewards, then you're no longer the reward, and we want you to be the reward. So that's how we train these dogs. And it takes us longer to do it, but that's the obedience stage. We train them all the way through that. And then the plan is once we have reached our operational budget, we do therapy with them. So at this point, they still haven't done any direct PTSD training or service dog training, but we use a therapy course, and we put them in therapy. And the therapy is we put the guys and gals and the dogs under stress, high stress. And the reason why we do that is they have to accomplish a task, right? And what happens is they have to work by, with, and through the dog to accomplish that task. So it allows me and the other trainers to identify and assess both the dogs and the people that are going through the course, right? So we're able to see who's communicating with the dogs, who's getting benefits out of it, who's the dogs kind of bonding towards or leaning towards. And then once that therapy is done, we pick 2 people out of each class, and each class is 6 people per class, and we do 1-week class each month of the summer. Once we've ID'd those 6 people out of the 3 classes, I bring them back for a week-long handlers course. But before they get that, I collect their cortisol samples through their saliva. So we collect it at different times. The first time we collect it is when they're calm, cool, and collective, or their baseline. Yep. And then the second time we collect it when they're triggered for their PTSD attack, and then we collect it when they're at their full-blown PTSD attack. And we train the dogs to recognize that change in the cortisol levels. So what happens is as cortisol levels go up, the dogs come in and they get their petting, and then it lowers that cortisol. You don't have a PTSD attack. In terms, you don't have self-medication, and you don't have a suicide attempt. Once they get trained on that, I bring them back one more time. They get their week-long handler course. I bring them back with their family member as well. They get their training with their family members. The whole family's on the same sheet of music, and we just kind of go from there.
That's really fantastic. I mean, we could probably do a whole nother show on this. There's so much information. It's such an important area. I think it's fantastic the work you're both doing to try and get these dogs available for these vets and to help individuals with PTSD. And I'd like to thank you both for coming on this week.
Well, thank you. And, it's really our pleasure. It doesn't cost the guys and gals a thing. We pay for all their travel, all their food, all their lodging. It's just a way of us giving back. And we really appreciate you having us on here, and we'd love to join you guys anytime you'd have us.
Thanks to you too, Dave.
Thank you so much, Fred, for having us on and getting to share just a small part of what goes into this beautiful thing of pairing K9s and our combat veterans and our law enforcement officers. It's just, we really appreciate you, and it's helping us get the word out. And that way people, if they have any questions, if you look on our website, you'll see that our hours are always open.
Fantastic. With that, back to you, Greg.
And there you have it, folks. That's a wrap for today's powerful broadcast. We want to extend appreciation to our worldwide listeners for tuning in, and our deep gratitude to Keith Holland, the founder and CEO, and Dave Eckerson, president and board member of Joint Task Force K9s, a faith-based nonprofit teaching the lives of active duty military, combat veterans, and law enforcement with disabilities through canine therapy and the placement of specially trained service dogs. Do follow their work on the web by www.jtfk9s.com and on Twitter via @JTFK9S. If you're enjoying our work at PopHealth Week, please show your support. Give us a thumbs up on your favorite podcast platform, share it with your colleagues, and do subscribe to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes. Remember, we're live on Healthcare Now Radio weekdays at 5:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And for our friends on the West Coast, that's 2:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and 6:30 p.m. Pacific. From all of us at PopHealth Week, Fred Goldstein and yours truly, Greg Masters. We urge you to stay safe and stay tuned, and until next time, fare thee well.